I think the main allure of the harp is the sound. It has almost a mystical, magical sound to it.
Mystical, magical, effortless. That's how a harp sounds, cradled in the arms of Hobson Pilot.
And the vibrations of the instrument, as you're playing it, it rests on your shoulder and you can feel the vibrations of the instrument.
She speaks lovingly of this stringed instrument, and rightfully so. For 40 years, Ann Pilot played with the Boston Symphony Orchestra, 29 of those years as principal harpist.
I decided to retire because, first of all, I thought that 40 years was long enough to be in one place at one time. And I also was determined to retire while I was still, as the sports phrase is, at the top of my game.
But getting to the top wasn't easy, especially for someone not considered a typical harpist during the 60s.
It was mostly an instrument for white women. As a matter of fact, I was the only one in all of my classes or in all of the summer camp that I went to. I was the only African American that I knew playing the harp.
Ann grew up in Philadelphia, her musical journey beginning on the piano at age 6.
My mother was a concert pianist, and my older sister played the piano. So I was just one of many other kids playing the piano.
The prospect of being one of many others didn't thrill Ann. So when a music teacher introduced her to the harp at age 14, it was love at first pluck.
I got water blisters at first, but I really enjoyed playing the instrument. It was different than the piano. You needed to control everything when you play the harp. You control it with your hands. There's no loud and soft pedal or the phrasing. Everything is done with your hands. And I liked that about it. So when I began, I just began as a musical outlet.
More than an outlet, the harp became an on-ramp to a major college scholarship and then to a stellar career. But it wouldn't be without perseverance.
My mentor, Edna Phillips, once said to me, if you're going to become a professional harpist, you're going to have to be twice as good as everybody else in order to get a job. That puzzled me back then because I was very young when she said that.
Naivete was a blessing. Not long after graduation, her first door opened.
The harpist with the Washington National Symphony had an injury to one of her fingers, and she was going to take the year off. So the people from the National Symphony called my teacher, and she recommended me.
Ann played with the Washington National Symphony for 3 years. Then a guest conductor from the Boston Pops heard her play.
He called me into his room and said that the principal harpist with the Boston Pops was leaving, and he liked my playing and he would like me to come to audition for the job so that I could be his harpist with the Boston Pops.
Ann got the job.
And then it was even difficult to decide whether to go because it was, in a way, going from a principal job to what essentially was a second job, even though it was principal with the Pops. So I turned it down at first, and they sweetened the pie and made me assistant principal.
The year was 1969. Ann became the first African-American member of the Boston Symphony Orchestra.
I was the only African-American in the National Symphony as well as in the Boston Symphony for about 20 years in Boston.
In 1978, her life became even fuller when she met the love of her life. Not surprisingly, Prentice Pilot has an affection for music too.
My husband is a musician. He was also in the Boston Public Schools for many, many years. He also played the double bass with the Boston Pops for 22 years.
When I retired, I put the bass in the closet and bought myself a saxophone and started playing jazz on the saxophone.
The two have separate practice rooms, but shared respect.
She's like a poet, you know. I mean, she plays the harp. She's able to get the essence of anything she's playing. It comes out, and I think that this is what people recognize in her.
Getting to the essence of her music meant tracing its origins. What she found was an instrument with a colorful past.
When you think about the harp, the origin of the instrument was probably the bow and arrow. The very first hunters, when they would come back from the hunt, would pull back their bow and arrow, and you could hear an actual noise. So the very first harps, you can see pictures in the Egyptian caves and all, were basically shaped like a bow and arrow with added strings.
In 1997, Anne was invited to South Africa to perform with the National Symphony of Johannesburg.
Something that would have been unthinkable for a black musician in the days of apartheid. This is dynamite. It's just a little crowded, that's the only problem.
Anne's career has taken her many places, but none as meaningful as her trip to Namibia in search of the harp's ancient roots.
We were in the Kalahari, where the San people, I had actually set this up with an anthropologist, and she was able to speak their language. They still play an instrument that is nothing but a bow and arrow, but they use their mouth as a resonator, and they have a little stick that hits the string. So it changes the pitch of the string. There are all kinds of instruments that they have there. They play the owachi, which has 5 strings.
Unable to bring her 85-pound harp, Anne brought the next best thing.
The expression on their faces was they were just amazed. It was a fun time.
She took a journey to trace the harp's colorful history. She returned with a colorful outlook for classical music and her people.
African Americans and other peoples of color are pursuing classical music now more than they did back then. But still, it's very difficult to get a job in an orchestra, and that's true for anybody. I mean, when I announced that I was leaving Boston, there were 140 applicants for my job, for my one job. So the competition is incredible, as you can imagine, just for any one job.
Before Anne's retirement in 2009, the BSO commissioned a special piece of music to be written. Anne's request for composer was unconventional.
I immediately thought of John Williams, who was, well, of course, he's the famous composer of all kinds of Star Wars and all kinds of famous films, but also has written some very good, serious classical music.
At first, Williams said, "No thanks. Writing for harp is quite challenging."
But we kept at him, and he eventually agreed to try, and he wrote what I think is a very, very beautiful piece. It's called On Willows and Birches. John is very much into trees, and it's dedicated to me.
Today, Anne spends her time teaching and relaxing on the Gulf Coast.
Move your feet.
Sometimes trading one set of strings for, well, another.
I love Florida. We love Sarasota, and it was frustrating, especially during the winter months, to have to leave to go back up north.
Less demanding schedules mean more time for recitals and a little collaboration.
We're just now getting to the point where I'm trying to work out some arrangements for harp and saxophone. So eventually we'll do something like that.
Fortunately, idle fingers are not instrumental to her definition of retirement.
I cannot see myself stopping playing the harp. I mean, if my fingers get too feeble and arthritic, perhaps then.
For more than 50 years, Ann Pilot has shouldered the weight of the classical harp. In return, it has lifted her career, her spirit, and her life with its mystical, magical sound.